Greetings, comrades! You all know that the Soviet Union stood for three things: the triumph of communism, world peace, and equality. Women in the USSR had the same rights as men, which is why there were so many famous Soviet women. They were stars not only in traditionally female professions, such as actress Lyubov Orlova or ballerina Maya Plisetskaya, but also legendary sniper Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the first female cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova, or the first female minister Yekaterina Furtseva. The main character in today's video is also absolutely unique. There were only 3 people like her in the entire Soviet Union after World War II. A person who lost her mother and father by the age of 14 and went from being a simple waitress to the director of a huge trust of restaurants and canteens. She was an honored worker of trade of the USSR. But did she want to become famous in the way that she did? I don't think so. After all, the Iron Bella went down in the history of the Soviet Union as one of 3 women who received the highest punishment – execution by firing squad. Although I mentioned that the USSR declared equality, it did not manifest itself in all areas of life. For example, in court, the death penalty, or as stated in the criminal code, an exceptional measure of punishment, was not applied to persons under 18 and over 65, as well as to women. However, as with any rule, there were exceptions. Throughout the history of the Soviet Union, several women were sentenced to death, but the sentence was later commuted to long prison terms. For all but 3 – Antonina Makarova, Tamara Ivanutina, and the Iron Bella. The latter was also the only one who was sentenced to death not for multiple murders, but for economic crimes. By the way, if you enjoyed this format, please leave likes and comments, and I will tell you about the other 2. Trust me, their stories are just as interesting. But let's get back to Bella. How did a simple waitress manage to build a dazzling career in trade and politics, becoming the boss of all the restaurants and cafeterias in the big resort town of Gelendzhik, a member of the Gelendzhik Council of People's Deputies, and a member of the Gelendzhik City Committee of the CPSU? And what terrible things did she do? Bella did not kill anyone, nor did she betray her homeland. So why was she sent to her execution? Finally, why did her case become a truly landmark event for the Soviet Union, one that to some extent predetermined its collapse? Let's take a closer look. What do you picture when you hear the nickname Iron Bella? Probably something between Margaret Thatcher and Bellatrix Lestrange, right? Overall, this nickname suited Bella. According to friends, Bella was a beautiful, vibrant and very charming woman, but also extremely tough at work. But when she was born, she certainly wasn't Iron. She wasn't even Bella. She was Berta Karol. Sounds good too, by the way. She was born to a fairly wealthy Jewish family in the Ukrainian USSR, but was orphaned at an early age. Her mother died when she was 4, and her father went missing in action during World War II 10 years later. The official history does not mention how this poor orphan survived the war and the German occupation. Some say she collaborated with the Germans, but there is no evidence of this. In any case, in 1951, at the age of 24, Berta appeared in Gelendzhik. She was already a divorced woman with a child. According to her passport, she was 5 years younger than her actual age. In Gelendzhik, she met and soon married a captain 3rd rank who was much older than her, changed her name to one she considered more elegant, and took her husband's last name. Thus, Berta Karol became Bella Borodkina. She got a job as a waitress at a local restaurant. Her colleagues said that her criminal talent was evident even then. She secretly took alcohol out of the bar and gave it to her husband. He soon drank himself to death, leaving Bella with his apartment and savings. Incidentally, she married 4 more times after that. However, we are not interested in her personal life, only her professional activities. In this regard, one could only envy her grasp. She had no intention of staying a waitress and quickly moved up the career ladder, becoming a buffet attendant and then a cafe manager. She changed positions every 2 to 3 years on average, always finding more lucrative jobs. Borodkina proved to be a very imaginative manager. Her first move was to teach the cooks how to save on meat dishes. For instance, adding a bit more bread to the cutlets would likely go unnoticed by an unsophisticated Soviet visitor. The remaining meats could be sold to nearby shashlik stands, a much more profitable venture. According to rough estimates, this simple scheme alone made Borodkina approximately 80,000 rubles richer over the course of several years. The cunning manager even cut costs on tea by personally training kitchen staff to dilute it with caramelized sugar to achieve the right color. Sour cream was diluted with water. Does the recipe call for butter? Cut it in half and sell the rest. But these are all trifles compared to the alcohol scams. Diluting vodka with water or simply not filling the glass is easy. A more complicated option is to dilute expensive Armenian cognac with cheap rye vodka infused with apple leaves. The taste was indistinguishable. While scheming endlessly, Bella was terribly afraid of incurring the wrath of the regulatory authorities, which could have easily happened if vacationers had been fed expired or poor quality food. Therefore, this was strictly monitored. Do whatever you want, but dilute everything with boiled water to ensure that no one gets poisoned. Employees caught doing something dangerous were fired immediately. At the same time, Bella earned money not only from selling food to the side. Each of the employees of all her cafes and restaurants was required to give part of their earnings to the supervisor and provide her with a luxurious lifestyle. Being a local queen, Bella didn't really hide her wealth. She loved furs, flashy jewelry, and young men, whom she showered with gifts in return for their affection. Borodkina did not tolerate competitors and got rid of them in the most sophisticated ways. Bella sent her people to the residential areas where vacationers not only lived but also ate, under the guise of being tourists themselves. They moved into rented accommodations, sampled the home cooking, and then pretended to be poisoned, after which they flooded the supervisory authorities with complaints. Inspections and fines quickly reduced the number of people willing to earn money by feeding guests. Finally, thanks to her assertive nature, by 1974, Bella had become the head of the local restaurant and canteen trust. In other words, the sole proprietor of all public catering establishments in the resort town. She oversaw fancy restaurants for the party elite and dozens of simply cafes, shashlik joints and food stalls, where millions of rubles changed hands. She was like a spider in the center of a web, controlling every ruble and every bottle of cognac. All of the strategies that she had perfected in her first cafes began to be implemented throughout the city. Catering workers who refused to participate faced an unenviable fate. They were transferred to the lowest paid positions or dismissed on trumped-up charges. Even when courageous employees tried to complain to the police, their statements were thrown away immediately. After all, local law enforcement agencies were also part of the Iron Bella's corruption network. Actually, while scamming regular tourists, the Iron Bella worked hard to win over the big shots. When someone important came to Gelendzhik, she had an exclusive menu ready with the freshest, hardest-to-find foods and fancy alcohol. In addition to setting up buffets in restaurants, she arranged tables for important guests on cruise ship decks and organized picnics on tourist trips. They say she also provided officials of all kinds with women of easy virtue. If that didn't work, she resorted to bribes. Of course, all this career advancement would not have been so easy if she herself did not have a high-ranking patron. And she did. Sergei Medunov, the first secretary of the Krasnodar Regional Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Once he even hosted General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev himself in Kuban. When the politician complained of arthritis, Medunov recommended a resort in the Krasnodar region. Whether the treatment helped or the acute phase of the disease simply passed, the politician's condition improved. Since then, he has been quite favorable toward Medunov and has constantly visited cities in the region. Naturally, Borodkina organized all the banquets as well as the breakfast, lunches and dinners for the General Secretary. Medunov was very pleased with Bella, if only because she constantly fed his high-ranking guests at her own expense, without asking for a penny from the regional treasury. In return, she gained access to the most senior officials and was able to expand her network. It was a win-win situation. According to the renowned Kuban historian, writer and journalist Vladimir Runov, Borotkina received personal patronage from members of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR and the Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, Fyodor Kulakov. But none of this saved her. How was Bella's underground empire exposed? Now we come to the most interesting part. Everything I described above was an impressive scheme, but rather trivial. There were people like Bella in almost every resort town. They would have caught her, found her millions, confiscated the money, and sentenced her to 10 years in a labor camp, right? Right. If it weren't for one person, the head of the KGB of the USSR and future General Secretary Yuri Andropov. But more on that later. Bella's empire began to crumble in 1981, when, despite all her connections, law enforcement agencies took serious action against the Queen of Gelendzhik. The most surprising thing is that she wasn't caught for restaurant fraud. When Borotkina was arrested, she thought it was just a misunderstanding. She even warned the operatives that they would have to explain themselves. After all, she, the Queen of Gelendzhik, was arrested over a trivial matter. The prosecutor's office had received a statement from a local resident claiming that pornographic films were secretly being shown to select guests in one of Gelendzhik's cafes. The organizers of the underground screenings, the cafe manager and bartender, were caught red-handed and could face up to 3 years in prison. During questioning, the catering workers revealed that the trust director had not only secretly authorized the screening, but also received a share of the proceeds. Of course, VCRs had just started appearing in the USSR, and underground rentals like this one could make you filthy rich. Bella simply couldn't pass up such an opportunity. Thus, Borotkina was charged with complicity in this offense and with receiving a bribe. However, when a search was conducted at the Iron Bella's house, the results went far beyond the case of the underground cinema. The luxury in which Bella lived was astonishing. Her home resembled a museum storeroom, filled with precious jewels, furs, crystal items and sets of bed linens, all of which were in short supply at that time. Borotkina also kept large sums of money at home, which investigators found in unexpected places. In heating radiators, under room carpets, in rolled-up cans in the basement, and in bricks stored in the yard. As a result, the search of the Iron Bella's home led to the seizure of more than 500,000 rubles in cash and valuables, a substantial amount at the time. It became clear that Bella was facing a very long and interesting trial, all because of some nonsense. How unfortunate. In reality, however, the reasons for the interest of law enforcement agencies in her were much deeper. The arrest and trial of the powerful Bella Borotkina was a landmark event. It cannot be said that this was the first anti-corruption case in the Soviet Union, but this case determined who would subsequently rule the USSR. Thanks to this case, Mikhail Gorbachev consolidated his position in the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, then became General Secretary and later President of the USSR. And Yuri Andropov moved from the position of Chairman of the KGB of the USSR to the Kremlin. How is all this connected? Remember when I mentioned Sergei Medunov, who often hosted Leonid Brezhnev at his home? They became very close friends against this backdrop. KGB chairman Yuri Andropov was clearly not thrilled about their friendship. He saw the General Secretary's health deteriorating and believed that Medunov could become Brezhnev's successor, or at least the secretary of the CPSU Central Committee, a position for which Andropov was promoting his protege Mikhail Gorbachev. No one was going to allow this to happen. The USSR prosecutor's office was tasked with digging through the Krasnodar region for compromising information on the local first secretary. Andropov needed a high-profile anti-corruption trial, and he needed it in Medunov's domain. And the prosecutor's office found it. When Borotkina realized that no one was coming to save her, she began to write down everything she knew. How the regional prosecutor had celebrated her daughter's birthday at her place, how all the officials had asked her to organize banquets, and how the city authorities had personally received huge sums of money from her. After one such interrogation, Nikolai Pogodin, the first secretary of the Gelendzhik City Committee of the CPSU who had been bribed by Borotkina, simply disappeared without a trace. He realized that Bella would soon drag him behind bars with her. The Krasnodar Krai police were sent to search for him and divers surveyed the waters of Gelendzhik Bay, but to no avail. He was never seen again, either alive or dead. In total, she exposed 24 high-ranking officials. Sergei Medunov was soon removed from all his posts and expelled from the Central Committee of the party. The Iron Bella even tried to feign insanity but failed. Experienced psychiatrists quickly saw through her ploy. Borotkina's case spanned 20 volumes, and 70 people stood trial alongside her. But even when Borotkina realized that she was in deep trouble, she could not have imagined how severe the punishment would be. Although the death penalty could formally be applied to women at that time, in practice there had not yet been any such precedents for economic crimes. Therefore, the Iron Bella was expecting 15 years of imprisonment with confiscation of property, in the worst case 20 years, if she was sentenced to death but pardoned. The court's verdict of death by firing squad came as a shock to everyone, but it was simply devastating for Borotkina. According to eyewitnesses, after the verdict was announced, Bella howled terribly in her cell at night, like a wolf. Her daughter was the only person who tried to save the condemned woman. The girl wrote petitions for clemency to all possible authorities, but her efforts were in vain. She was refused everywhere, and for completely formal reasons. Allegedly for Borotkina's refusal to participate in cultural and politically significant events while she was a free woman, like Subotniks or May demonstrations. It is believed that Bella was brought down by the very thing she was most proud of: her connections with high-ranking individuals, whose names she constantly used to her advantage. In the current situation, her former patrons were interested in silencing the Iron Bella forever. She knew too much. The fact is that in parallel with the Gelendzhik case, the KGB was investigating an identical case in Sochi, and the local Bella, Valentina Merslaya, received only 15 years in prison for similar crimes. The amounts stolen by these two individuals were of a similar order, millions of dollars. But Bella was not forgiven for her prison revelations, hence the execution. However, questions remain as to whether the sentence was actually carried out. There are no documents in the archives about the execution, and the exact date is unknown. Bella's daughter was never given her mother's body. It was reportedly buried in an unmarked grave. Some researchers suggest that the Iron Bella managed to fake her death and escape, as her accomplice Pagodin did. Is this believable? She was certainly no stranger to cunning and deviousness. However, there is no evidence to support this theory. However, Bella herself is living proof that under the slogans of building communism, individuals created entire criminal empires and remained unpunished for decades. That even in the USSR it was possible to buy almost anyone. It was just a question of price and the right approach. Thanks for watching, and well, if you liked it, let me know. And as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Елизавета Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Zeman Böze, Petar Ilich, Marina Holiday, Lyudmila Ilyanova, and one more member who wished to remain anonymous. See you guys next time.